ago when we were thinking about how do we combine over 80 institutions' knowledge networks in order to form a national organization that had a clear mission, a vision, and goals and objectives. And so I just want to point out that this resource and connect to the people of Purdue University figured this out, the same level of meta-analysis. And what we developed was a national clearinghouse, which was needed, of information on all of these different hazard resources, and we defined them in clear categories. But what we made sure to do is to facilitate the in-community practitioners' access to resources without getting in the way.
Okay.
And so I just want to point that out.
What's the website address?
So it's extensiondisaster.net.
Okay.
Yeah, he's gonna copy it in. Yeah.
Okay, great.
And
Okay.
maybe I want to connect you to the people for
Okay.
you.
Yeah, so let's not recreate the wheel then, right?
Yeah.
Okay, there was a lineup here, then over there, and then back to top.
I would like to add to his statement, which I really liked, having RISE as a full network, adding in all these capabilities. FEMA has brought out this idea of the community license, which makes it even easier for us to direct our efforts and be able to build the networks and say, okay, where does this capability fit inside a response or a recovery, without needing to have that full ICS knowledge. If you know the community lifelines, which are very, very simple, and you know where it fits, you have the full bridge between emergency management and the community. That way, when we are in full response or in full recovery, this network that is RISE could show up even using the emergency support function number 13 and say, we have these capabilities for this community lifeline. And that is one way that would be really useful to us. I work for the Department of Health, and I know that it would be absolutely useful for us to have one point of contact that's our network, in which we could say the community lifeline that's health and medical has these capabilities that fit inside these functions. That way we can better use it. We know what you're doing, we know your capabilities, and we can actually provide, it's an easier way for us to give you, okay, so what information do you have and what do we have? And actually provide you with a full mission assignment, and we can exchange information. And even during preparedness, if we follow the community lifelines, it's a very simple, if you look it up on the internet, it's so simple.
Okay.
And
So
just
it seems like we have evolved into what we're supposed to be talking about during this day, which is how do we achieve. So we have a couple of models already that we've heard on how we can achieve the objectives. And Tom, I hear we have to parse this out. What are the goals? What are the objectives? We can do that later. But I think you were next, and then Tom. But I want to almost end this here soon, right, Oscar? We have to get some buy-in that, again, don't get caught up on whether a goal, objective, part of the mission statement. But are these core elements of what we might see in a mission statement, what we might see in goals, or what we might see in objectives? Is there anything, I guess the point is there anything that's missing from that? Because I think they still, let's not worry about refining those down, but is there anything seriously missing from that?
I just, can I add that? I think about the ethics of this. You know, we're dealing with the communities, that, you know, at some point in the statement is to say that the communities have the right to not to do this if they don't want to. And we, ethically, we should not try to...
Right of refusal, kind of.
Yeah, so respect the right of the community to embrace this or to refuse this. You know, we don't need to force things into them. I also think that, you know, there's a need for coordination. RISE is trying to find what to do. Hey, we work up there all the time. We just open different groups doing different types of community work. We need a centralized place, and we need someone to be the master of all this information to avoid duplication, lack of coordination, the better efficiency of use of funds. And I think RISE should not do what everybody else is trying to do, but to find a niche and then do that niche and take care of that niche well. And I just suggesting that this role of trying to be the central point for coordinating the community of practice of disasters.
And I think that goes into the idea of the network, which I am truly in love with the idea of RISE being the network.
Okay, so let's hold for a second, let's capture these. I have a lineup that I promised before.
Yeah.
All right, 4 and 5, could we somehow build in, I'm sorry, 3 and 4. Could we somehow build in 3 and 4 the concept of being a coordinator, as you said? So I think we were talking about adding that word earlier and we didn't. But you also brought up the idea of trying to find out what the niche is and fill that
Yes,
as well.
where is it, the thing that we can do that is not being met by anybody else.
She's not being met by anybody else, okay. I've got a lineup, I want to be true to the lineup. Oh my gosh, it's like long now. Here, and Tom, and then I'll remember where we were before.
I'm just a little confused about what is the information that is being aimed at. Is it operational information during a disaster? Because, I mean, that takes a whole different level than if it's, when we're talking about academic or other kinds of meta information. But to me, they're very different. You know, they have very different structures underneath, and I'm kind of grappling with that. Maybe that becomes clarified in the discussion, but I'm not clear.
Okay, so hold that, and if we don't answer it by the end, we've got to go back to that.
Yep.
Tom, you were next.
Well, so I wasn't suggesting that this is the way forward, but I was just saying that this is a possible way of framing this. And when I say trusted source, it doesn't mean that everyone has to change the way they do business or change what they do or give up anything. It's just basically connects to that idea of convening or coordinating. It's a knowledge network perhaps, and underneath that, within the arms of this big entity or network, community of practice, there could be operational stuff, there could be other, I mean, it could be divided into whatever it needs to be. I guess my point was, rather than continuing to have a very disparate community of parts where people are doing many different things, where it's harder to navigate for folks within this community practice or those who are new to it.
Okay, I wanted to go to people who haven't spoken yet, and I'm going to go to the people whose hands up that have spoken. Knowledge network was a key term you just used that I think we should capture. Okay, who has not spoken yet? I know there were hands of people that have spoken. Okay, I think, yeah. And then I think Kyra, and back there, and then Carmen.
Yeah, just quickly, to go back to where we started, I think one of the elements that is missing is establishing a baseline or common understanding around responsibilities in disaster research. I know that's one thing that one of us is going to talk about quite a bit, and in some ways inspired all of this. That doesn't mean to limit what RISE would be, but I do think it's missing from what this.
Okay, so this, I think what's coming out here, and again, Kyra started this, is we need information before I think we can refine what this platform is. We need to know where the responsibilities currently reside. We need to know what people and organizations are already doing. We need to, in other words, we need to know models that are already out there that seem to be working well. So all of that, getting that information, will help inform the RISE platform. I think that's a key point, Oscar, that we're going to need to report out on tomorrow.
Is this for
yes.
New York and Puerto Rico only?
I don't think so. I think we're just using the Puerto Rico experience. And certainly there's needs there, but this would be something that be rolled out for disasters.
So you're looking national?
Absolutely,
Okay.
national.
I gotta point out, that we said 20 minutes, and we're meeting that mark,
Yep.
so we should start transitioning into the objectives of today.
Okay. I had Carmen and then Kyra.
Yeah, I don't know, were you also that she said about information, and I also want to integrate knowledge, interchange of information and knowledge.
Absolutely. If we are able to provide that network, it's gonna be infinite opportunities for us to integrate all the sectors from universities, locals, the communities themselves, the government at different levels. But that's why for me the community-led lens is like the perfect way to go, because it separates, it's a language that government at all levels, we all understand during all phases, preparedness, during response, during recovery. We are all getting into that as part of NIMS, and it's now brought up, and I think it's simple enough to integrate, like when you have a vast, infinite universe of knowledge, to be able to lay them out and, okay, which lifeline does it correspond to? Is it to health and medical? Is it to infrastructure? Is it to shelter? Where does it go? So that way you have a bank of data that's useful for everyone. Everyone knows where to look because that's the lifeline that you're gonna be impacting one way or
Okay,
another.
so we've got that, and we're definitely gonna have that as one of the ways that we meet our objectives. Carmen,
Yeah,
and then Kyra?
in the experience we've had, communication. So it's, how do we better integrate? Because I know it's speaking, there's the component of speaking truth, but just designing effective communications mechanism with such a wide and diverse group of people.
So you think that should be added as an element?
That
Yeah,
should be
okay.
added as an element, that it's urgent, and we see it day to day with the recovery in Puerto Rico, that there's no communication sometimes between the federal agencies, the local government, the Office of Disaster Recovery, and just how to better establish communication mechanisms that are effective. And into building to what Danielle was mentioning
Okay.
earlier, I think yesterday we talked about the different dimensions. So it's the dimension of disaster response, disaster recovery, resilience, sustainability. So maybe we want to think that the network has different focus areas. And I like the idea of integrated some of the framework that it's been worked upon at the federal level, because part of that has been integrating to the local government recovery effort. So how do we all start speaking the same language in terms of some of the strategies, recognizing that it's continually changing as well, as we've seen with disaster recovery and how the history of how we do recovery and resiliency continues to change.
Okay, so there's three things there. Designing effective communication, and Devin's got it pretty good here, so designing effective communication between elements, and that's between sectors. What would you put in there, Carmen?
Just that
Agencies,
all the
organizations?
all
anybody involved?
stakeholders
All
engaged,
stakeholders,
yeah.
okay.
Including the oversight, the financial oversight.
Then the other one, I think we can add here, Oscar, is you specifically talked about, Carmen, you specifically talked about federal agencies and the existing frameworks, and we've already heard about FEMA as that framework, for instance, so you want us to be specific here and identify that we need to
It's
integrate.
building up on that, and an opportunity for universities is to evaluate and test that framework to see if it fully
Okay,
works.
and to test it.
And even revise.
And then the third thing you said, what I think is also important, is that this is really a kind of a three-dimensional thing. We might take a different approach, whether it's recovery, rebuilding. So you're talking about these pillars of what happens pre-disaster, post-disaster, and there's different needs for each one of those stages. So this might change depending, so we just need to recognize that.
Yeah,
I think that's another asterisk kind of thing, Oscar, and I'll about it.
And there is also a translation challenge when you're talking between government officials or talking to academics or talking to a community, so the point about communication, we need to have different types of communication strategies to deliver to those stakeholders.
And just let's pause for a second so the moderators can catch up here. So it's that, this.
You can map this across the entire disaster cycle, which is.
Yeah, well, that's it, right? So across the stages through a complete disaster cycle. Okay, I had Kyra next, and I know there's other hands up, and I'll ask you to.
I just want to say, we're actually transitioning into the theory of impact, so, am I right?
So how do we basically put these into action?
So, going to help you with that. So, I believe we are missing local knowledge or indigenous knowledge, maybe in the second or in the 8th point, when we were talking about sectors and knowledge.
Okay, we'll Oscar come here and Devin's capture it.
Indigenous knowledge or local.
So we got three different ways we're trying to capture this, so if you don't automatically see it in one of these, we know we're getting every single word.
And jumping to the next one on the how and the process,
Hold on a second, Kyra, I want Oscar to capture that, so I wanna make sure we do see that up there, the indigenous.
Aquí.
In the second
Oh, you're
or
way
in
ahead.
the eighth?
Okay.
In the second point or in the eighth one? In between sectors, adding, indigenous knowledge.
Right at
or
number 8.
Indigenous organizations. Or local knowledge too in the second one.
We'll clean it up later. We'll get it, we'll combine.
Yeah, and regarding the process and how to do this, I think that how the communication is key. Because me as an individual, with local knowledge, trying to contact personal experience, USDA or the Department of Health by phone is virtually impossible to have someone responding to my questions or my willing to collaborate. So I think that RISE should be also open for us to reach them and have a response each time we go knocking doors as a community or.
So RISE needs to be, whatever RISE is, it needs to be very responsive.
Responsive or having those channels to be
Accessible and responsive in the channels to
And how to
local
do that,
communities and
yeah.
others.
And a very specific objective should be that RISE should become a support agency listed specifically and explicitly on ESF 14 and the others that's relevant too. Because if you're not on that list, then the district manager is not gonna respond to your information. You might as well not exist.
Okay, hold on a second. So I want to make sure that Oscar
That
got
was
that.
off your point.
Yeah.
Go for it.
The other one, Oscar, was making sure that RISE is accessible to service providers and communities in a rapid sense. Okay, can everybody who wanted to speak raise their hand so I can get back in order here? What we're doing? 2?
One thing to build on that is, kind of the thing that's kind of in my head is the national VOAD, and would you mind if I read their mission statement? Their mission statement is National Voluntary Organizations Active in Disaster, an association of organizations that mitigate and alleviate the impact of disasters, provides a forum promoting cooperation, communication, coordination, and collaboration, and fosters more effective delivery of services to communities affected by disaster. And they are the appointed lead for 14, ESF Emergency Service Function 14. And, you know, that's kind of a big, you know, like, definitely there are some issues with VOAC, and, you know, especially working with the disability community. There's no representation. There's indigenous community, there's very little representation. But if we're gonna come up with this, we have to figure out how we work in that ecosystem.
And how do we differentiate from what they've already put in place? Because that mission statement sounds awful, a lot like what we've been talking about.
Yeah.
Can we check number 10, adding indigenous and rural community knowledge on the process and framework? Can we add consult? Because in terms of indigenous knowledge, not all the knowledge is written.
Yeah.
So
If
right here, like in the
yes,
beginning, consult.
adding and consulting, and depending on where, geographically speaking, and depending on which nation you are talking about, the knowledge could be perceived or delivered differently.
Sure.
So I think that's integral because, yes, I could have put more, but I.
Okay. All right, I think Jason had his hand up,
Just
and then
one
we'll.
final comment on this, this capacity building counterpart. And I think that so many of the comments around the room are about augmenting and changing the context of that. I think what it somehow explicitly needs to be referenced in what we write is that certain objectives emerge from the incident command system and all of its apparatus. But that what this organization might be able to provide is that second member of the Cartesian grid that allows the third dimension that the gentleman mentioned, which is going to be the question of why did all these questions come up in these low population areas about why resources weren't coming there or why they were prevented from coming there by individual emergent actors, and what is the justification for that? And I think this organization could serve as an aggregate, a clearinghouse for individual emergent actors, VOADs, et cetera, to work in a more horizontal manner that would allow the question to arise of, well, it doesn't have to be like an after-action report of why we never addressed this. It could come up in the process because we're not asking to be involved in the decision-making process explicitly, necessarily in terms of the federal process, but we're saying we have a lot of content that we need to contribute, and if this isn't considered, that's why it's
Right, so I think that clearly is about how we're changing behavior. And you put that in terms of demographic, how do you
so far over my head.
how do you boil that down to something that we can share?
I'm getting the impression
It sounds kind of like assuring that the requisite information is considered included.
I think it's assuring that grassroots, local, indigenous voices are included in the conception of objectives.
Okay, there you go.
Conception of what?
Objectives.
Can't hear you over here.
Yeah, I'm gonna repeat it. So assuring that local, indigenous, community, input is considered in,
In the formation of objectives,
in the formation of
objectives.
disaster objectives, okay.
It
That's good.
frequently happens that,
Respect for self-determination.
yeah,
Okay, you can add that as a more explanation with.
that's a great way of putting it.
So just this.
Hold on, 1 second.
He said
Okay.
objectives-based recovery, which I think encapsulates.
Yeah, so add a couple of little sub-bullets there to help us better understand this when we go look at it later, Devin. So that one, what was that?
Objectives-based recovery,
Objectives-based is.
although whose objectives still is remaining
Right, so if that's,
Right,
if that's a
understood.
process, then you want to have input from all affected parties.
All right, and what did you call it?
Just respect for self-determination.
Yeah, respect for self-determination.
/
For
sovereignty.
the community.
But yes, yeah, that's important too, yeah. So respect for
This
self-determination.
kind of analysis is typically called an after-action review. So maybe the specific outcome is that a coalition of actors across the spectrum in community practice must participate in the after-action review and ensure that those, whatever the critique shows, that gets actually implemented into disaster preparedness before the next crisis or.
Okay, so I just want to clarify now.
Yeah,
Are you seeing, because again, this is how universities can play this convener role of making sure that happens? Is that what we're saying?
Yes, and then RISE would be a.
Okay.
convener.
Why wait until after action? I'm wondering if they should
Right.
not also be in the regional and national response coordination centers,
Yes.
working, right?
And again, I just want to reiterate, so the universities
Yeah.
that participate in the RISE platform can help convene and bring those stakeholders to the table.
Third-party validation is what is frequently referred to
Okay.
in federal speak.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, and I was gonna say, that's one of our biggest issues in after-action reviews, is we can't find that impartial third-party
Okay.
trusted agent.
Okay, show me hands again of people who want to say something. I want to make sure I'm saying that. All right, Mark hasn't spoken. Oh, yeah, you haven't spoken yet, so we're going to go here and then we'll go over here. And you haven't either. I'm sorry. I apologize.
Well, I hope I'm not going off on a little bit too much of a tangent, but I'm just trying to understand. So RISE, is RISE an agency, a professional organization? Is there dues going to be paid? Because I'm a member of the AMS, the NWA. I was part of a social science group called Was This, but they disbanded because they didn't have enough funding. I'm still trying to understand what RISE really is. I know we're trying to define what RISE is,
That's right.
but I mean, without some sort of resources for ourselves to be able to, implement and enact this. I don't know if it's money or time or whatever it is. You also get into the issue of, a lot of people are doing a lot of what you've outlined already, because the American Meteorological Society has a whole, section that does a lot of social science research. We have journals that document research into emergency management, social science, and behavioral studies. And so there's a lot of overlap going on with a lot of organizations that already exist. And what we risk doing is kind of, an inconsistency of message issue that we have to be very careful of, because, you can have differences in some information that's available, and without, people pick and choose their sources of information based on their own preferences and their belief systems and such. So we have to be careful about consistency of message also.
I want to try to restate some of this because it's important, and I want to try to answer the first question that you asked. So again, this gets back to the question of what is the niche that we're trying to fill, and understanding what's already happening out there, and not just, that's why I was reading my comments, and not just creating yet another thing to join, or that's going to be stepping in the space of others. I think this is really important for us to report out tomorrow, that this group keeps going back to that we need to clearly define what is this going to be that's different and enhances what's already out there. So what is it that RISE could be that enhances, is different, fills a gap, but does not recreate what's already out there. And we keep going back to what Kyra said yesterday. We really have to understand what's out there. You both speak with authority, like you were nodding your heads, yes, I didn't know those things existed. So we have to all better understand what is out there, what are those resources, right? And on your first question, I just want to finish with I don't know about the dues or anything. I think we're looking at this the other way. Let's create something and then go and try to sell it. So I don't think anybody's really addressed that as we get on the funding aspect of it. All right, yeah.
So just 2 quick points. We keep bouncing back and forth between disaster response and then recovery.
Right.
I think we should try to make those statements as universal as possible.
Okay.
When we talk about plugging into existing networks and existing structures, if we're talking about federal or local or state constructs, sure, it may make a difference how to navigate those things, but I think we should try and stay, for all of the statements, they should be kind of to both. That they should be for disaster response, also for recovery. Disaster response, I think, where applicable and practical, and then definitely for recovery, because that's going to be, a sort of a long-term thing.
On that point, before we go on, and today's been a long day for me, and you had described that differently. You talked about the whole disaster spectrum. What was the terminology you used? Because you captured it already. But
Maybe a disaster cycle?
Yeah, so can we understand that one?
Yeah.
That's what we're
Yeah,
talking
I
about?
think that'd be great,
Okay,
to just
right.
call that out, sort
Okay.
of consistent
Okay.
and everything. The other piece I wanted to, I think I raised my hand before, but in New York City, we usually carve out, at least for the health department as part of the responses, we carve out some funding to do independent after-action processes. We've found that that third-party validation is really important. Also helps between the adjudication and arm wrestling that goes on, even intra-agency, to say, oh no, this is your responsibility, no, it's our responsibility. How are we going to fix it and work through those corrective actions? And I think that's important to have that to recommend. To me, it seems important to have recommendation for outside evaluation of that, and that's a role I think that could be by an academic body.
Okay, so this has come up a couple of times too, and I want to test the temperature here. Are you and others who have brought this up suggesting that RISE could be that third-party validator, or could bring people that are part of the RISE network to the table to be a third-party validator?
I think that's a good thing. I think that's a good thing. There are lots of contractors who do this, but
So we'll be competing with
right.
the,
But you have like Earth Institute in Columbia. You have James. The whole spectrum of those folks who do it.
Okay.
But academia or those organizations that are more academia connected probably should get involved.
Okay. I'm still trying to mostly go to people who haven't spoken before.
If I could just say something real quick, if the comments are gonna contribute, could we also touch upon the impacts the RISE network could, fulfill or expose upon?
Okay, good point. So, Mark?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that we have to do is it's good to broaden to see where we can reach, but we have to kind of bring it down to what RISE is and what it can do. It is not a federal agency. It can certainly look for goals or ways to get there to say, okay, how am I compatible with federal agencies? And you saw this position from them and a communication call, okay, we can do that. And then there's plenty of things out there. And maybe we become a repository or a search engine that allows to find the gaps of how they work. But they don't work now. But they do not work now.
When you say that, what do you mean they don't work now?
Well, it didn't work. So that's why we're here. And I'm not saying that they did a bad job singularly. Doesn't mean that, oh, they built that, but nobody used it. That's the fault. No. Well, how do we fix it?
So this is the crux. Why the hell are we here anyhow?
And something didn't work. Yeah, and I think that the idea is that whether it's technical or ethical, we're looking for solutions. And you have a bank of intellectual power and a great network that is obviously interested, that has to come up with a process so that they can, but they should not outreach itself into like, we're gonna run the country, because it's not gonna happen. But you do have a, well, sure, but I can't run.
We couldn't do any worse.
I can't run, no.
Oh, right, that's right. After this room can't run.
Yeah. But I think that we should determine what, and I think it happens when something is born, right? That is, even this, that is so powerful and good, and has so much drive behind it, to find its compatibility and its effectiveness is what you're trying to do to get to this theory of change, and it involves using whatever else is out there and understanding why it doesn't work, or getting it to the people who need it. It involves an intellectual exercise where we look at it and it's like, in this changing world, that can't be that way, and we, as whatever RISE components are issuing this process, this statement, this idea.
Well, so, I guess it's one question, I'm losing my voice, but what is the need that we're trying to answer? But also, so if you listen to Ellen last night, there's a NOAA climate service, and they're regional, and they want to be the place where people go for getting their information. EPA has another program like that. USDA has a program, DOI has programs, states have programs, professional societies have programs, AMS has programs. I mean, there are all these places existing that are all going to be potential to one-stop shop, but they don't actually have everything, right?
And we also, just to expand, we also learned about all the tools that exist, and people don't want any more tools, they just want to know how to use the tools that are out there.
There's more content probably than anybody can handle.
Yeah.
But is there any organization, who's using that in quotes, that is serving that up, that is the referral point, the portal to get to the right stuff?
No.
That's what maybe
That's what I mean, that it could be a repository or a search engine, not only for tools, but for connection, that matrix we were talking about, where you could be like, oh, I'm a 10,000 population place, and then the tool comes up, sure. But at the broader level, like at the assistant, I think one of the key components from that top-down approach that you all talked here, it's not me saying it, it's like, once you connect to a local component, boom, now the answer's there. So the capacity building that we can create as RISE in those places, and the development of hubs in those places that exist sometimes, don't exist all the time. They don't exist where I live. They do exist in the University of Puerto Rico. So that connection, so there's a certain roadmap that we have to make.
So they don't exist in VACIS, but they exist in UPR. But that might be on the other, that might as well be on the other side of the world.
But what I'm trying to say is that there has to be a local specific thing that is somewhat fluid when you deal with disasters, right? We established that. So that has to transfer into my needs, also links. I don't want RISE to suddenly say, we're gonna build a place everywhere in Puerto Rico. No, you need to build maybe VACIS, but the UPR certainly has to cover, so it's site-specific fluidity.
And how do we puncture current behaviors to actually achieve this then?
Well, so one of the things, going back to the after action, everything I said, I've been through so many after actions over the years, and do you know what happens to it? It goes in a binder and goes on the shelf. and we lose that connection of the local community. Hey, this worked in your community, but didn't work in your community. Hey, we made this great connection, but it gets lost in the dust of the shelf, because the next time we need it is 10 years later. And that's where I'm kind of seeing in my head is that holistic conduit. So it can provide that service for the after actions, it can provide that conduit, the repository, all that stuff, and have that great overarching view that can help people, because we don't have that. VOED doesn't do that. You know, speaking as a member of VOED, we started one. You know, we need that, and that academia, you can look at that, dial it down, build the trust, keep it from going into that binder on the shelf.
So we've done a little bit of that, corrective action work from a systems perspective, and it takes a really long time. And it takes a long time not to forget those things, right? Actually, talked in the last session about having short memory versus long memory. The memory that we usually have a very short memory. And so what we've done in New York City, we've created a database that we utilize to track those after actions, to make sure they get resolved, and then link them back to capabilities in our planning processes, so that we know, a certain organization has this certain capability. That capability is talked about in this plan. Here's the times that we exercised it. Here are the times that we had to actually use it in a real world situation. And here are the times where we had to make changes to it. And it takes a long time, a lot of resources. And I think we've been at it for, since I've been there, so about 15 years. And there's still a lot of ways to go. But there are ways to get at certain little pieces of that. So you can have clearinghouses of that, but things need to be structured. That takes resources.
This all sounds good. What's the operating concept? I mean, of all these capacities and capabilities, I'm trying to piece it together, and I have different scenarios going. Does somebody understand the operating concept of or take a shot at it? Because we're in the theory of change, right? How it's going to flow.
I think a lot of this more nitty-gritty action that we're talking about in this session as opposed to yesterday needs to be informed by something that's closer to the heart of how we can impact these things. And that is, yesterday we seemed to gather some consensus around the idea of redefining resilience and making it more explicitly inclusive. And then, so if we look at what the measurable aspect of that is, it's going to be, and this, your point is exactly right. How does this fit into existing funding streams? It doesn't at all. And that's actually the point of it, is that it doesn't fit into it. But then there's all of this potential new funding under pre-disaster mitigation. We are Section 1206 and DORA, which are pending actions with billions of dollars behind them. And I think that one of the things that we can do to tap into some of that resource is to, as a policy recommendation, make recommendations on definition, and then in the other hand, offer up metrics for that definition. And I'm going to suggest that housing displacement be one of those metrics for successful resilience. And that's where we get interagency cooperation, and we advance mitigation to the front of the disaster process instead of being told that your time is to come. That's not in response. Because if we can get people talking about mitigation, because there are funds under DORA tied to being consistent with the non-displacement metric of resilience that's being held at the national interagency level, then we can get our ideas across.
Metrics are great. In fact, if we see the fruits of our labor by seeing how the metrics prove that we're making a difference, then it's a snowball. It's a feedback which will motivate us even more, and more will get done. So metrics and seeing how we're making a difference is I think going to be a big part of what goes, moving forward.
Grabbing up on that, what other metrics could be, tangible for a successful recovery?
I don't know how we measure it, but we know that there are issues with the allocation of funding that scale with the magnitude of the disaster. So basically, the larger the disaster, the less likely the resources go to the places where it needs to go. And I kind of see us as potentially like a watchdog of equitability of the allocation of those resources. And so I don't know exactly what metric's appropriate, if there is one that's been defined yet.
But there's, all kinds of metrics for disasters, fear standards, different kind of, that you can look, you don't need to solve everything, but you need to address the basic needs of people, nothing else.
Like I want to see like percentage of local businesses that actually recover after a disaster. Versus corporate entities.
Yeah, or like new businesses that open. The other thing too is that factoring is frequency of disasters, because that was another compounding the past couple seasons, was if this is your, if this is your 5th major hurricane that had a substantial impact, like for example, I was running a kitchen during Hurricane Irma. We ran out of food containers. There was not a single one left in the continental United States.
Wow.
And they cannot keep up with the production because of Harvey, the Las Vegas shooting, Irma, Maria. Like there was just no physical way.
I see that there's in terms of, we have a lot of information. So I guess one of the questions, according to what is what is the products that we're really looking for?
Yeah.
Like we could talk, and it's very valuable things, but and some people have recorded this information before.
Yeah,
But what is the products that allow us to do something with it, and that it's not just a publication? How do we work that?
Along those lines, I just wanted to, the metrics is a really important thing because it depends on the definition of recovery. And I just wanted to contribute that in the recovery process from all the other hurricanes and natural disasters in the United States, what I've seen and I've learned in these last 2 years is that there has been major displacement of the poor and the vulnerable. So there should be, and I would ask academics to develop a measure. How can we measure displacement? How can we measure the recovery of communities in their integrity? Maybe they will have to move from the place in some instances, but not destroy them. So how could we develop a measure? I'm not in that department, but that would be a great measurement to have and to be able to say that there is a just recovery.
Regarding academia, the way lately we're framing this is governance of disaster. And there are measurements and there are frameworks in the theory, and I think that we are trying to redefine that governance and seeing that governance going to rise as that governance of disaster to rise in partnerships.
I think sometimes we measure success in commercial value, and we often see, and sometimes that displaces people even more. So you have a disaster, it actually makes for those areas to be developed and raises rents, raises home prices because it's new construction. So then the worry also has to be, is that displacement not just because of resources, but also because of capital?
Metrics is a very difficult conversation to have, but very, very important. I don't think we're going to solve it here, but I do want to flag that FEMA has done some work on this, obviously. They've just put out a few weeks ago a draft document on community resilience indicators, and they're welcoming feedback on that. So everyone in this room can actually put their thoughts down on paper and give it directly to FEMA, and that should be reflected in the final document that they put together. But that's just a process to track for everyone's benefit. There's also the resilience indicators that they come up with would also presumably be of interest to RISE, of course.
I have a question. I mean, in terms of, again, operations and products, I think one of the things that I see from RISE, from participating in RISE this one, is that they're talking about paradigm and breaking this and all that. So I think one of the things RISE will do is establish, I don't want to say a philosophy, but a process, a statement, whatever the academic term for it would be. They're determining a way that should be operated that was not, and that through their analysis and the participation of people, they have determined that in disaster, well, this is how they feel, or how they feel it should be. But past that, we see a lot of things, for example, all this data, all these tools, all these studies in your academia. So there has to be a way that is just simply more than one document, right? So is it a technological answer? Is it we were talking about clearinghouse. Is there a way that this becomes useful, or that is useful to find the gaps or the mistakes within what they develop? You know?
Who's next?
This is a tangent, but just something that's very important to keep in the background. Do we need to develop a new framework or a new process? Or are we facing issues where we have inadequate funding of existing programs? For example, I'm not suggesting the creation of a monoculture here, but the Cornell Cooperative Extension has 62 offices across New York State. And if I could fund a full-time disaster educator for each of those offices, we probably wouldn't be talking about some of these issues. But the reality is that I don't have that, and none of us as an institution individually has that kind of funding right now. We face administration where this clearly is not a priority. So I just want to make sure, do we need to more effectively, come together so that as a collective community of practitioners, educators, regulators, policymakers, so that we're actually just getting those dollars down to the local levels more efficiently, keeping it there. As I politely alluded, but I will say more emphatically, CERT has been a disaster in New York State.
Because they cut the funding.
Yeah.
There used to be a lot of funding for CERT teams, the community emergency response teams, and then as soon as they cut the funding for that, they dried up.
It's the same with the county animal resource teams in New York State. 10 years ago, we had all these great resources for these mobile carts to respond to livestock and pet emergencies during disasters. But then if you don't have continued funding, and this is this perennial issue we face with not funding things during the dormant part of the disaster cycle. So I just want to put that out there to make sure we're not throwing out old frameworks. It's what are we facing with respect to corruption or lack of board prioritization of this program.
So we've got about 10 to 8 minutes left, so we should start engaging on the closing remarks on how could we achieve these desired outcomes.
One example, pre-existing framework from the electricity industry.